融聚智慧，方能融创价值。融你我，融无限。江苏银行。
本节目由江苏银行冠名播出。
Ni hao. My name is Tom Sargent. I'm an economist. I teach economics. I try to do some economic research. You're watching the show Whose Time?
2011年诺贝尔经济学奖得主美国经济学家托马斯·萨金特呢，今年已经74岁了，但是他依旧活跃在宏观经济研究的第一线。目前呢，在纽约大学任教的他开设了一门课，叫做高级宏观与数量经济学，同经济学数学模型相伴，每年陆续有新的研究成果发表。萨金特早年呢，曾经先后执教于宾夕法尼亚大学、明尼苏达大学、芝加哥大学、斯坦福大学，主要的研究领域呢为动态宏观经济学和计量经济学。那么，作为理性预期学派的开创者之一，他推动了新古典宏观经济学体系的建立和发展，在宏观经济模型中预期的作用、动态经济学理论与时间序列分析的关系等方面呢，都做出了开创性的工作。凭借着在宏观经济因果关系研究领域的贡献呢，他在2011年被授予了诺贝尔经济学奖。今年6月份呢，萨金特加盟了深圳的北京大学汇丰商学院，组建了萨金特数量经济与金融研究所，并且出任所长，参与了博士生和研究生的这样的培养工作。有着中国情缘的萨金特又是如何看待自己的这一新头衔呢？
So welcome, Professor Sargent, to our program. We have an institute named after you in Shenzhen. What motivated you to join this institution?
What motivated me was the young professors there and the students and the dean who want to push forward in terms of both teaching, learning, and doing research in quantitative economics, quantitative methods in finance and economics, computer science, math. So there's some very good people there. They're already there, and they asked me to come and participate with them. So they set this institute up.
I remember you mentioned the institute aimed to use big data and quantitative methods.
That's one thing.
Yeah, relating to big data, I looked up on Wikipedia. There are two definitions. One is predictive analytics. The other referring to scale of the data, which means so large or so complex that traditional can't handle. Which vision of the big data do you have in mind for the institute?
Big data is partly an advertising sales campaign because it's most of it, with one exception, is a new word for an old word that people thought was boring, which is statistics. So, and another word is like machine learning. What's happened in the last, so two things have happened in the last, you could say 50 or 20 years, and it's going on at an accelerating rate. First thing that's happened is computers have allowed us to compute some things that we couldn't do before. We could write down equations, but we weren't smart enough. Humans aren't smart enough to actually calculate the things. We're not fast enough. We actually don't have enough memory. And computers are much better at that. So that's really growing. And the second thing that's happened is China is a leader in this. We've acquired data, and actually industry is a leader in this. It's come from more from practical people. They've collected data, with one exception, I'll tell you one exception. They've collected data, big sets of data, bigger sets than we ever imagined we'd have. And then, so now the question is, they're so big that there's questions about how do you manage them, how do you extract. So actually, the way people study that is they actually use some classical statistical techniques. So big data is both, we've got more data than we used to have. In some ways, the challenge is too much data, because you get overwhelmed. And so how do you simplify it? So then the speed of computers. So actually, so this has happened in my lifetime. I'm basically older than the first computer that was made, which is an amazing thing to think, So if you think about that progress, just think what's going to happen in your lifetime in both of those things. So I'm really excited about learning and applying these things.
And we know there is a big data fever nowadays in China. And in your opinions, how big a problem is?
I agree with you. What I see is it's especially hot. I think the promise is tremendous. One of the big limitations of economics is getting timely and accurate information about other people and what they want and what they have and how good they are at keeping promises and what their characteristics are. And there's some people talking about really creative ways of using big data to learn about people in ways that can help them. Like an example would be delivering banking services to rural people in poor areas, not only in China, but it could be the United States or Southeast Asia or Africa. So I think the promise is tremendous.
Recently, Jack Ma claimed, with big data, planned economy can come back. Do you agree with that point of view?
So Jack Ma is saying it is true that if you can get this information in a reliable way and use it properly, but I'll tell you where I think he's wrong. To use it properly, even with the most powerful computer, it's little stupid little examples where 2 goods, 4 people. The number of people, in principle, Ma's right, but in practice, we're way far away from that. There's a huge incentive problem. The faith of the market economy is that individuals know more about what they want. It's best if you leave them with a lot of authority. But sophisticated people who want a state-controlled economy, they don't really want the state to tell you everything to do. But they want to say, the state's going to offer you some choices where you're going to end up choosing what's best not only for you, but for society. And the choices are kind of complicated. That's the way that's called.
Actually, besides big data, there is another 2 topics also very hot in China: fintech and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Do you see any major differences in the development of those new trends?
So I think those are the same thing.
Those are the same thing. Why?
Different of these sectors in between China and US.
I see China's ahead in some ways, in some applications. So, example, I have a Huawei phone, and I have WeChat, and I can pay for things on. So, like in Shenzhen, everywhere you go, all my friends just do this. And now, my American friends who come, they're very impressed that I can do it too. So, but I think China's at the cutting edge. Things like ordering things online with delivery. So I know that that's going on in the U.S. too.
2011年的10月10号，在美国普林斯顿大学的会议厅里，萨金特被授予了诺贝尔经济学奖。诺贝尔委员会呢评价称，萨金特对于解释宏观经济学当中的数据有着非常重大的贡献。他带来的计量工具呢，在国家的政策下，对于全世界的经济学研究都有着重大的意义。实际上呢，由萨金特与卢卡斯、巴洛和华莱士于上世纪70年代开创的理性预期学派呢，如今已经成为了经济学的主流思想。而萨金特本人呢，也成为了全球引用率最高的前15位经济学家之一。回忆起当年获得诺贝尔经济学奖的一刻，萨金特的内心又是如何的感受呢？又是有什么样的原因，让他对于未来中国学者获得诺贝尔奖有着十分积极的态度？
So let's come to the Nobel part. This year's Economic Nobel Prize is coming up, I think, early October. China has been always crazy about this prize. What's your view about the importance of the Nobel Prize to a person and to a country?
So I think that when you say people are crazy about it, these are supposed to be prizes for achievements in, science or literature. So I think it's great that it's admired. And then, what's true in most fields, and especially true in economics, is people win those for one reason or another. They often win the prize for things that they did 50 years ago. An example would be something called the Higgs boson. It's one of the most important things in physics. The person who won that prize, he won that prize maybe 45 or 50 years after. And the reason I mention that, is certainly in economics, but I know in other fields. Since China opened up, the students that I have from China, I've had students at Stanford and NYU. I teach graduate students. They're very smart. And I realize that they got really good math and science training. They have great work ethics. I put all those things together. They're creative. So what's going to happen is 50 years from now, China's going to be, you see, 40, used to be big returns from this in every field. They already are.
The only things we need is just time.
Yep, time and openness.
The rational expectation theory have been used by a lot of people over the years. You once said physics is about causality into the future, but it seems in economics, future is somewhat determined by people's current judgment.
No, let me say it differently. I know some physicists, and I've gone to conferences with them. So did you take physics, or like in school? The way Newton's laws of motion go, or Laplace, classical physics, the world unfolds like this, and the past is what causes the present, and the future unfolds out of that. So the causality actually flows one way. Okay, so what's unusual about, so time unfolds like that. So what's unusual, when I'm talking with physicists, economic models have the following situation. What I do now, or what you do now, as a businessman, or planning your career or something, depends on what you think is going to happen in the future. So your expectations about the future influence what you do now. So there's a sense, so now we say, well, your beliefs about the future are totally disconnected with what will actually happen. It's just imagination. But now you kind of think, well, wait, if you're kind of really interested in what's going to happen in the future and you really care about it, you spend a lot of resources predicting the future. Now it gets to think, well, what we can expect to happen in the future actually is influenced. So it actually creates an arrow of causation going the other way. And that surfaces in our models. So that we use some of the same mathematics physicists use, but there's differences.
So does that in some way means the predictive capability of economics is really limited? Because causality could flow the other way around.
It affects how you use economics to predict things. It affects, I want to say it a little differently.
Okay.
And what's true is that physicists have trouble predicting things too.
Yeah.
And actually, those people I met in Sweden, the three very nice, who discovered something really important, what they got famous for was overturning a very well-established prediction. And then also, as part of that, it's scary. The main thing that they discovered was physicists don't know where most of the energy and most of the matter in the universe is. They call it dark matter and dark energy. It's just, dark means I have no idea where it's from. So there's huge unknowns in physics, and huge they've had smarter guys working on it longer than economics. When we talk to physicists about limits of our ability to predict, they don't make fun of economists. And we have plenty of things we can predict, some of which Mr. Trump should take account of. If you go copy Argentina, close up your economy, protect all your industries, in 100 years you're going to look like Argentina does today. There's enough evidence in on that. We have country after country we can say that to.
You also once mentioned hope economics can be like physics, being more quantitative. After the financial crisis, there is some reflection for the profession, or say teaching of economics. Some people already think economics too much based on, say, models and mathematics. What's your response for that?
That they're dead wrong, and they're uninformed, and usually they're old people who are bitter. If you look, most of the people who do that, who say things like that, don't actually practice economics, and they don't actually know enough mathematics to criticize it. What's true is young people are using more and more sophisticated mathematics and statistics and computers. So the history of every science is, every time there's a technological or mathematical innovation, grab it. I don't care where it came from. So what's true in any field. So economics or any kind of rigorous quantitative is basically a young person's game. It has some analogies to sports, I think. And a young person has an advantage in terms of being sharp, being willing to commit, spending the time. And then a lot of people, my age have quit. But then you still get asked, well, what do you think of what these young guys are doing? And you could say, oh, it's not like the old days when. But the young guys are in control, and they're using high-tech things, and guys my age should be supporting them.
2008年金融危机爆发呢，已经过去将近10年的时间了，至今却依然让全球的金融市场谈虎色变。那么在一系列的监管改革之后呢，欧美银行体系重新的恢复了活力，而美国总统特朗普甚至扬言要废除金融危机后主导美国金融监管的法案，种种的迹象呢，都很容易让人感觉到，似乎金融危机的余波已经退去了。但是在另外一方面呢，一些人却依旧保持着忧患意识，认为在全球经济刚刚复苏的当下，金融监管的逐步放开会带来新一波潜在的风险。那么对此，萨金特又是怎样看待的？
It's almost 10 years since the onset of the Great Financial Crisis. There is this famous Queen of England inquiry to economists. Why didn't you see this? What do you see is the problem here?
You're going to get a financial crisis. I could show you articles. This very article was written in 1978, and the United States was even before the Reagan administration. We were in the process of deregulating our financial banks. They were very highly regulated in ways that prevented them from making various risks. And those people forget about history at their peril. Those regulations were put in simultaneously with the introduction of deposit insurance. Our banking accounts are insured by the government. If a bank fails, the government bails me out. And in the late 70s, there were proposals to take it off. And my friends wrote this article. And here's what it said. If you leave deposit insurance in and you deregulate banks, banks have an incentive to become as big as possible and as risky as possible. And they will, and that's in their shareholders' interests. And with probability 1, eventually, they will fail and you will have to bail them out. And their recommendation was either don't deregulate, or if you deregulate, you have to reform deposit insurance. Those are your choices. It was a very simple article. That was ignored. Within 10 years, we had the savings and loan crisis. Perfect fit to that. And then it was ignored again. And then in 2004, this is 4 years before the financial crisis, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis wrote a book where he said, it's a popular book, said the same thing. I can point to a number of people they didn't say it was going to happen in August 2007. They did say it's going to happen for sure unless you change these things. So that's what people should have told the Queen. We can't predict it's just like one of the speakers said today, we can't predict the exact date. You do a bunch of stuff and you're just, it's like this. You have a sister or a brother or something, and they're drinking a lot, they're taking drugs and stuff like this, and they're having a great time. You say, sooner or later, you're going to be really unhappy about it. Oh, tell me when. You can't predict a date.
One of the favorite topics is about separation between monetary policy and fiscal policy. And nowadays, especially central bankers would say monetary policy and fiscal policy should be completely separated. Deny any kind of helicopter money.
Well, so the first thing is, there's a technical thing. Formally and economically, it's impossible to separate them. And since the financial crisis in the United States, the line between fiscal and monetary policy has been erased. The central bank has done things, it's acquired a huge portfolio. It's acquired powers to pay interest on reserves, which means it's going to have to acquire the power to tax. It has the power to commit the Treasury to spend money that the Treasury didn't vote. And this is a thing that people don't like to talk about in public, but it makes central bankers very nervous. This is an issue that's never going to leave.
In recent years, there has been this big debate about industrial policy. The former World Bank chief economist, Justin Lin from Chicago, always propose heavy industrial policy, while another Chinese economist, graduated from Oxford, propose free market. How shall we draw the line between these?
So the question is, who do you think is, I don't think on a single case-by-case basis, both sides can give little arguments, give examples where something worked out well or worked out badly. The markets, lots of investments undertaken by the private market are not a good idea and they fail. And the private market has if it's left on its own, it has a way of taking care of that. The failure is painful, but you go out of business. Maybe your reputation suffers. So it has a way of discovering what kind of goods, what ideas are good, and in terms of what is going to produce things that people want. That's the whole thing. The whole thing is, how do we discover new things that people want, or old things that they continue to want? That's the whole thing. Not only our people, but people abroad. And it's a daunting thing to discover. So now the question is, do you think private companies can do it, competing? Or do you think government agencies that don't compete? And I'm not an ideologue on that. I think there's some things where the market needs help. A lot of it's like research that doesn't have an immediate payoff, like pure science, some things. There's spectacular. If somebody says the government can never organize something to produce something, that's a foolish argument. My own country, you look during World War II. You read about the Manhattan Project, where the atomic bomb was invented, and there was a race. There was a race against the Germans and the Japanese, both of which had programs. So the U.S. did a really good job of, you read about it. At first, it was a big struggle, but the market would never have done that. Too much money. And there's other examples like that, like railroads and stuff like that. So,
are we tipping point a transformation from the paper money to digital money?
I don't know. It's a great question.
You can predict.
No, I can't predict. This is all about information theory and whether you can actually construct a fail-safe digital currency. That's still, the technology for that's still being developed. But then there's a couple things. There's digital currency, and there's the connected payment systems that are outside governments. So governments all over the world and banks all over the world are really concerned about this. I'm just speaking from a complete outsider, because I don't have any information about this. I think one government that's probably the most concerned is the U.S. government, because it gets a lot of power from its control of the international currency system. If you want to transfer money across borders, you have to go through there's a system that you have to go, I think it's the SWIFT system.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a monopoly. I think it's a private monopoly, but the United States government puts a lot of control on it. And first thing is they make a lot of money for doing nothing. Their marginal cost is zero. If you send me $200 from China to the United States, we have to pay like $20. Well, you must have had this when you were in USC. And it costs them nothing. There's various platforms. One is called Ripple. It's a completely different model where anybody can just transfer money like that, and it costs almost nothing. So you're in a situation where you have a monopolist, SWIFT, that's making money for doing nothing. And what protects them is no entry. So now, anytime you have a business where there's monopoly profits, you're going to have people want to enter. So this is what's going on. So there's two kinds of people who are threatened by this. Private banks are threatened. And now I think what's going on is governments are threatened.